Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me. We are studying from the book selections from Likutei Sichos for Bereshit, the portion of Vayeitzei. We are studying the third talk of the Rabbi. The Rabbi is going to talk about Jacob's journey into Haran. Jacob's twin brother wanted to kill him. Their mother, Rivka, heard, and to save her son, she commands him to leave the country, his homeland in Beersheba, in Israel, and go to live with her brother, with his uncle. On the way, he stops for the night in a place where he has a famous dream with a ladder of angels. He wakes up and he realizes this place is a holy place. When he wakes up, he turns to God and he makes a vow, asking for God's protection. And he turned to God and he says, if you will protect me and allow me to return back, I will do such and such for you, which we'll discuss. And this is going to be the topic of our discussion. In next week's Torah portion, we're going to be discussing actually his return and bringing back and fulfilling his vows, so to say. That's next week's portion. This week's portion, we read about the vow or the deal he's trying to make with God. Our Torah reading states the following. Yaakov took a vow saying, if God will be with me and protects me in this way and give me bread to eat and garments to wear, and if I return to my father's house in peace, then God will be my Lord, and this stone I have erected as a monument will be a house of God. And everything you will give me, I will certainly tithe. So he makes a condition. He says, God, if you protect me and allow me to go and live in peace and return back to my father's house, I will make this stone as an altar for sacrifice, and all that you give in me, I will give tithe. The commentators question, this is not the Rabbi's question, but the commentators. How is it possible that Yaakov made his performance of good deeds? This stone will be the house of God, and everything you'll give me, etc., I will certainly tithe, dependent on God's fulfillment of a condition. If God will be with me and protects me, you have a mitzvah to fulfill. You cannot make a condition. If you do your part, I'll do my part. It doesn't work like that with God. How can he tell God, if you'll be with me and protects me and allow me to return successfully, then I will make it a house of God and I'll give tithe? It's an obligation that he has anyway. Don't ask me about the Torah. The Torah, they kept the Torah. They followed all the commandments, and therefore he had an obligation to give tithe.
Where does it say in the Torah that you have to give tithe?
Where?
The masters.
Yeah, later on we read about it. Aser te'aser. Yes. This the implication appears, heaven forbid, as if Yaakov served God solely for the sake of receiving a reward. In addition, serving God for the purpose of receiving a reward is an inferior way of serving God. There are two types of people who serve God. There are people who serve God for the reward. There are people who serve God to serve God. And yet, we see that Yaakov seemingly is serving God. You'll be my God, and I'll make an altar and bring a sacrifice and give you tithe. Only if you do such and such. That's the way he speaks. It does not befit a holy man like Yaakov. That is implausible. After all, we are speaking about Yaakov, our patriarch. Hence, it can be derived from the narrative that by connecting his vow and good deeds with a condition, Yaakov was not making a deal that he's vowing to perform these good deeds so that his stipulation be met. Rather, he had the opposite intent. His objective was to fulfill his vow. He made his vow dependent on the condition, if God will be with me, because this was the only way he would be able to fulfill it. Therefore, says the Rabbi, we must say that the reason he made that vow, it wasn't a stipulation, it wasn't a condition, it was just part of the vow. He says, God, I want to serve you. I want to bring a sacrifice in this place because it's a holy place. I want to give you tithes. So please be with me, protect me, and allow me to return back. So when on my way back, I can fulfill all that you told me. So this is a simple way. So it's not stipulation. It's not a condition in the vow, but actually a condition in order for him to fulfill the vow. You cannot fulfill the vow unless you're safe and sound and you're able to afford it. And that's what he's asking from God, to assist him in fulfilling it. A deeper understanding can be reached by prefacing two interpretations of the vow taken by Yaakov. The Rabbi says, let's go a little deeper, and there are two commentators who explain that vow in different ways, and each one will lead us to a much deeper understanding of the vow. Rashi, the Rabbi is going to talk about Rashi and Ramban, Nachmanides. Rashi explains that the condition Yaakov made includes and ends with, and God will be my Lord, which he interprets to mean, there will be no imperfection in my seed. And God, when he says, he's asking God, please allow me to be with you, meaning that all my children will be perfect, will be holy, will be blessed to be Jewish people, as was not the case prior with Yitzchak and with Abraham. Abraham had Ishmael, Yitzchak had Esau. He's asking God to allow for his children all to be Jewish. Yaakov's vow begins with the following verse. This stone that I have erected as a monument will be an altar to God, and I'll give tithes. That's Rashi. So Rashi says that when he says, if God will be with me, he's not asking and making a stipulation, but he's begging God to allow him that all his children, he's going to build a house, he's going to start a family. The purpose of going to Esau is to get married. His mother says, get married to one of the daughters of my brother. And therefore he says, God, if you bless me and enable me that all my children will be connected with you, then I'll be able to do such and such. So it's not part of stipulation, it's asking God to connect with him.
Well, let me ask a question, Rabbi. Here's the mother sending him to Laban,
Yeah.
who she knew was evil. Yet she's sending him into the lion's den, so to speak.
First, I am not sure how well was she aware about Laban's behavior. Second, I don't know that she had a choice. What other choice did she have? And third, in those days, you marry within a family. You know, the tribes marry their own twin sisters. Until Torah, God gave us a Torah, they married their own sisters. So this was the only choice she had. She didn't have another choice. By the way, Rivka was also a cousin of Yitzchak. You know that, right?
But the thing is that you said she didn't know how evil Laban was. Laban tried to hold her back from going for a year. So stay with us for a year before you go back to marry.
Well, Rivka,
yeah.
But he wasn't a cheater. He was an evildoer, but not that famous. He wasn't the godfather yet.
Okay.
He was one of the ranking members.
Okay.
He probably had few skulls under his belt, but not that big.
Stones quietly. Okay.
Well, that's probably true. I mean, he was more of a was Ghana.
Enabler.
Wheeler dealer. He was always looking for the angle. You know,
That's
he was
it.
looking for the angle that he wasn't really being dishonest,
My kind of
but
guy.
he was looking for the angle. He didn't do anything.
Belongs in this show, right?
What?
He belongs in this show.
I can tell you one lesson I learned from it. When you marry somebody, do not pay attention to the father-in-law. It doesn't matter what kind of father-in-law you have. If the girl is for you, if you love the girl, huh?
Say it quietly.
It's schwer, it's very schwer.
The mother-in-law.
What?
Well, there was no mother. There was no mother.
Did we cover all the jokes about in-laws? Can we move on? Yes.
3 times, I don't understand.
Now you understand.
No, the difference between Rashi and Ramban.
We didn't get to Ramban. Rashi says that the question is when the conditions begin, when the vow begin, when the vow begin.
And the
We
vow-
understood that the vow begin if God will be with me, protects me, allow me to return back safely.
Right.
God will be my Lord. On this rock I'll bring a sacrifice and I'll give tithes.
Yeah.
This is the vow.
Right.
So the vow included a condition, a
Mhm.
stipulation. Come Rashi and says no. He turns to pray to God and he says, God, please be with me, protect me, and make sure that you're my God. My God, meaning he already accepted God. My God, meaning that all my children will follow in the same stepfoot. And then he makes a vow. The vow begins with this stone, making a vow without stipulation. This stone that I have just saw, the stone that is in front of me, will be an altar and the foundation, cornerstone of a foundation of a house for Lord, and I will give tithes. So there was no stipulation.
No
And
condition.
the condition, no condition, and the vow begins that just he says to God, I will make an altar and bring a sacrifice here, and I will give tithes. Nothing to do with the condition. Do you understand now?
Now I understand that.
If you read it in the text, you'll find
Is
it.
that where the Kodesh Kodashim was?
Yeah, the Holy
Now-
Temple.
No, no.
Even still, until today, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, inside there is a huge rock, which is, by Jewish tradition, was the very famous rock that stood in the temple, which is the foundation of the universe. That's where God started to create
Alexa, the other one.
Dome of the Rock.
Al-Aqsa.
It's a Dome of the Rock. There's
What
two
did
mosques.
there too? I
Yeah.
didn't know.
There's a big
Uh,
fancy one.
The dome.
The Dome of the Rock is what you see.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
The
okay.
Alaska Mosque is the old, it's like an overlooking building that's next to it.
Okay, I didn't know that. I've never been there and I'm not allowed to because I'm impure. But that rock is the stone that Yaakov
yeah.
erected.
Big
Okay?
rock.
Big rock, huge
Yeah,
rock.
And
Later on, you read that hundreds of people could move a rock and Yaakov did it like
That's the same rock.
ah,
That's the same rock.
No, but-
But isn't that the rock supposed to be the rock that the sacrifice, when Isaac was going to be sacrificed?
it was the same spot, but not that. That's not rock. In the Talmud, we are told in the Mishnah that on that rock, whenever holidays would come, they would announce lost objects. In those days, many people who found objects they didn't know what belonged to. People traveled, walked from town to town on their journey. So they would get up and say, I found a wallet in such and such area. And so any Jew who lost something would be able to go to that rock, stood next to and wait if someone announces something similar. And they announce it 3 times, 3 holidays, and after that he can keep it. Right.
Okay, so now we got one.
Ramban, not Rambam. Ramban, Nachmanides, however, differ with Rashi and interprets, and God will be my Lord. According to Rashi, God will be my Lord is not a stipulation. It's just a committing and begging God to bless him. He says not as the continuation of the condition stipulated by Yaakov, but rather as the beginning of his vow. The condition ends with the words, if I return in peace to my father's home. In other words, Ramban says, if he says to God, I'm making a vow, if God will be my Lord, if God will be my Lord and protects me and be here for me, then when I return, I'll bring a sacrifice in this place and I'll give tithes.
We're back to the
So we
original,
back to stipulation, exactly.
which is
That's
good.
Ramban Nachmanides. Ramban's interpretation requires explanation. Since and God will be my Lord is the beginning of Yaakov's vow, it would seem the division of the verses should be different. And God will be my Lord should not have been the end of the verse beginning with if I return in peace, which is part of the condition, but rather the beginning of the verse, this stone, which is part of Yaakov's vow. I just will explain it, even though it's so to say the Rebbe, sometimes the beauty of the Rebbe is that every detail has to fit and will fit by the time the Rebbe explains. But sometimes you need to put your mind into those questions that later they shine. The Rabbi says, if according to Nachmanides, God will be my Lord is part of the stipulation. He says, God will be my Lord is part of the stipulation. In other words, if God will be with me, protects me, and return me back in safety, back home, then God will be my Lord. I'll bring a sacrifice and I'll tithe. God will be my Lord should be part of the stipulation, not part of the vow. And if you read the text, and God will be with me is before he completes the vow. So according to Rashi, it's not part of the vow. It's just praying to God. The vow begins much later when he says, I will bring a sacrifice here and I'll give tithes. That's it. According to Nachmanides, there was a stipulation. Part of the stipulation is if God did such and such, God will be my Lord, I will bring a sacrifice, and I will give tithes. So God will be my Lord should be towards the end when he's stipulating what he will do if God fulfills what he's asking. But if you read the text, it says, Imaya Elokim imadi, if God will be with me, Ushmarani baderech hazeh asher anochi olech, and he guards me in the path that I'm walking. V'nosan li lechem le'echol u'beged lilbosh, he gave me bread for feeding and garments too. Ve'aya Hashem li le'elokim, and God will be my Lord. Ve'aeben azot asher samti matzeva, and the stone that I erected here will be an altar. So the idea of God will be with me is part of the stipulation, not at the beginning of the vow.
I have no.
Ali, do you understand the difference between a vow and a stipulation to a vow?
Condition, if then.
If
The question
then.
is if then.
So when I
We
tell
are
you
if
that then is God will be my Lord,
Yeah.
where does it belong? Before the if or after the if?
Where we're doing it now is after.
After the if.
After the, if then.
If then. So the text is then, if then. If God will be with me,
Yeah, then I'll do it.
and he says, and he gives me such and such,
All this good stuff, yeah.
I will do such and such, and
Yeah.
then I will give also tithe and make bring a sacrifice on the altar.
That's all.
It's still conditional.
That's the condition.
Still
If
conditional.
you do all this good stuff for me, then I will do this for you. And we're arguing that that's not a good, that can't be the case because Jacob would never make a condition like that.
But it's,
So Rocky says no problem, right? But
The-
now-
I think there is it naturally follows.
God will be my Lord is part of the is part of the vow.
Yeah.
God will be my Lord, and I will bring a sacrifice and I will tithe. But God will be my Lord is at the beginning of is saying
Of the vow.
of the vow. And it should be at the end as a result of the fulfillment of the vow.
If it was a condition. If
It's
it wasn't if then.
According to Nachmanides, it's a condition,
So it
yes.
should have been, so it's written wrong, okay?
Right, it's in order. The order
Right.
should have been different. God
the
will
order
be
is
my
to-
Lord should have been at the end. In other words, if God will protect me, bring me back safely to my house, then God will be my Lord. I will bring a sacrifice and I'll give tithe.
Okay. but it's
The
not-
way it's written is if God will be my Lord, if he brings me back safe and gives me bread and garments,
Anyway, it's the same
and
thing.
I'll return back to my house, then I will bring a sacrifice on this place and I will do tithing. If God will be with me, if it's a vow, should have been much late, is part of the condition, should have been after the vow.
I think that what I'm looking at is the condition is if then, but what should have been is God, you'll always be my Lord, protect me, so on and so on. And because you will do that, I want you to know that I'm going to be whatever, I'm going to bring sacrifices. That's the way it should not have been a condition. It should have been straightforward. I will do this, I will do that. So please, God, be with me.
That's right.
The way the Rabbi says it is a very simple way. The Rabbi says that you have what is vowing and you have a stipulation to the vow.
Whoa, explain. Just what's-
You have the vow,
Yeah,
And then you have a stipulation. What does he want for the vow? What will he pay for the vow?
Oh, no. If then is.
I am not going to take
If
the
is
if and then because it
stipulation, then-
confused me. I'm hearing a vow much simpler. You make a vow with God,
Yeah.
and in return, you offer to pay based on the condition if that and that is fulfilled. He's making a vow with God. He says, if you give me this, then I will, in return, do such. What's the problem?
That's a
is the
condition,
vow.
that's conditional.
That's conditions.
Right.
So
Just
now
a minute.
the if part is now part of the vow. Then is the vow. If this happens, then I promise, right? Isn't that what we're saying?
Okay, that's fine.
If this happens, then I promise. I will make this vow
Right.
only if this happens.
So if I told you that part of the vow is God will be my Lord, it
Okay.
comes after the if.
Okay, after the then.
The then,
It comes
After.
the then.
right? No, after
Then
the,
is the vow. If these conditions, then is the vow.
and part of the vow, that part of the then is God will be my Lord.
Okay, fine.
So it should come after he is asking.
Okay, fine.
And it came before he's asking.
Okay.
So it's starting of offering God to be my Lord.
Yeah.
Then he's asking what he needs.
Right.
And then he says what he will do if that is fulfilled. But if God will be my Lord, should be at the end, not at the beginning. Okay. Now, yes, Steve, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that the then part really isn't a true then of the conditional. It would naturally follow that this is what he wanted to do the whole time. He wanted to serve Hashem.
But he's tying it with a condition. He's saying if God did, if, im yeh
That would
Elokim.
enable Yaakov to do what he was going to do anyway. That would just enable him.
No, it enabled them to ask, to demand that God will protect them and give them garments and food. And a righteous man, that's the problem we have. A righteous man do not stipulate about their service to God and accepting God as their Lord. According to Rashi, there was no vow. He's just telling God, you will be my Lord. And I'm asking you to give me, to bring me back safe, to give me bread and garments, so I should be able to serve you by bringing a sacrifice and by giving tithes. So there is no vow, there is no conditions. Ramban, on the other hand, says no. He was making a vow, and he's offering in return certain things. One of them is God will be my Lord. Says the Rabbi, the order doesn't make sense according to Nachmanides, according to Ramban, because God will be my Lord will be after he's asking, after, as part of the vow. Do you understand that? And it appears in the text first. In particular, this division appears preferable because, according to his interpretation, the phrase "and God will be my Lord" is connected to the phrase "this stone will be the house of God." In other words, it's part of his payback, what he will do in return. So it should be right there at the end, together with the stone will become an altar, a sacrifice. Not only because they are both part of Yaakov's vow, but because they are thematically interrelated. As Ramban explains, Yaakov was saying, I will serve the unique God in the place of this stone. It will be a house of God for me. So V'aya Hashem Lil Elokim, God will be my Lord, is part of the altar he's going to build in this place as a house of God. So why does he start with God will be my Lord, and then he says, if he will protect me and give me garments and food, and I'll come back safe, I will make this as an altar and a house of God. Now you understand?
Okay, problem. I don't know the answer.
Thus, it must be said that even according to Ramban, even though "and God will be my Lord" is part of Yaakov's vow, in one aspect, it has a greater connection with the condition "if I return in peace" than with the conditions, with the continuation of the vow, the stone and tithe. For that reason, "and God will be my Lord" and "if I return" are included in the same verse. He says it must be that there is a direct connection between "if I return back safely" into the idea "if God will be my Lord." And it's a much deeper connection than the rest of the part of the vow where he says, I'll bring a sacrifice and I'll give tithe. Yaakov's vow is divided into 2 verses. Did we study it? Yeah. Yaakov's vow is divided into 2 verses. And here are the 2 verses. One is, and God will be my Lord. And the second one, and this stone will be a house for God, and I'll bring a sacrifice, and I'll give tithe. Because they represent 2 facets of the vow, as explained above, similarly, the condition Yaakov stipulated are divided into 2 verses.
2 and 2.
378.
If
Oh, you didn't read the summary.
I skip the summary.
Oh, okay.
If God will be with me, protect me, and give, and garments to wear, and be, if I return in peace to my father's home, and according to Rashi, also the conclusion of that verse, and God will be my Lord, because they are of 2 different natures. The Rabbi says, the reason the vow is broken into 2 verses is simply because it's 2 aspects within the vow. There is one aspect that God will be my Lord, and he will take me in safe on the journey and give me bread and garments and return me back to my house. And the second one, I will bring a sacrifice here. It will be a house of the Lord, and I'll give tithing. That's a second part of the vow, and there are 2 distinct ideas. The difference between the 2 is reflected in the wording. The first verse speaks about conditions God was asked to fulfill. It tells God to do something. If God will be with me, protect me, and give me. In contrast, the second verse states, if I return, not if you return me, if you bring me back, if I return, as if Yaakov would be returning on his own initiative. Says Rabbi, if you look at the 2 verses, they are 2 distinct, just even by the simple meaning of them. The first one is asking God to do, to bring me, to give me garments, to give me food, to become my God, to allow me to come back safely. That's one. The second one is about Yaakov. I return back safely home. I will bring a sacrifice. I will give tithe. So there are 2 distinct, no matter how you do it, either if it's a vow or according to Rashi, it's not even a vow. These are 2 distinct action. One is about God, asking God to do all of the doing. God is on the helm, is at the driving seat. And the second one is Yaakov. This is what Yaakov does. To offer a resolution, can we continue? We are page 379. To offer a resolution, Yaakov's descent, living Beersheba and Eretz Israel, and going to the diaspora, and particularly to Haran, a place whose name is associated to it, arousing God's anger in the world. Haran is Haron Af Shel Olam. It's the most anguished place that causes so much anger to God. Was a descent for the purpose of an ascent.
What is Torah?
Haran is between Iraq and Iran. Okay? Now, so there is a descent for the purpose of ascending. If you want to jump very high or very far, you take few steps back. Why do you take a few steps back? You get all the oomph that enables you to
Momentum.
get the momentum, you get the energy to allow you to jump very far. This is the reason Yaakov comes from a holy place, Beersheba. It's one of the 6 holy cities in Israel. And he's going down not just outside of Israel, but to the worst place at the time that God, before Sodom, after Sodom, it's the worst place. Probably during Sodom time, Sodom was worse. But right now, Haran is the worst place for God. God was very angry with the people and its inhabitants. And he goes down there, it's a descent. He's going down so he can ascend much higher. And that's the Rebbe's interpretation.
By the way, Beged, devotion, and Lachem Lechol, there's also some drashim on that they could just give me everything I need rather than.
Why did he say Beged Lechol?
I don't remember, but I believe there was a commentary on it.
I'm sure there's commentary. Yes, there is commentary on this. Let's continue. The ascent comprises 3 dimensions. Descent, we know for sure, is going down to live with people who are crooks, liars, cheaters, that you can't even trust them in one way. What's the ascent? In 3 ways. A, though he endured living in Haran, and specifically in Laban's home, he nevertheless emerged unmarred by sin, without being affected by his surrounding environment. This enabled Yaakov to ascend to a higher level than is wrong before this descent. One point, says the Rabbi, by living there and not learning from their ways and not adopting their crooked behavior made him a much holier person. If he would be in yeshiva all day, he would be surrounded by Rivka and Yitzchak all day. He is not as holy as someone who is facing all those challenges and refuses to bend. The difference in the level of Yaakov's divine service resembles, though not entirely, the advantage of a Baal Teshuvah, one who turns to God in Teshuvah, has over a tzaddik, righteous man, as reflected in the teaching of that even a perfect tzaddik cannot stand in the presence of a Baal Teshuvah. Why? The Baal Teshuvah achieves this wrong because he tasted sin and nevertheless distanced himself from it and overcame his natural inclination. So a Baal Teshuvah stands on a much higher level than a tzaddik, and that's what happened to Yaakov. He had to go to live among wicked people, bad people, and not learn from their behavior. That put them on a much greater step. B, in Haran, Jacob, carried out the command, be fruitful and multiply, right? Fill the earth and conquer it, as well as his father's instruction, take a wife from there, and may the Almighty make you fruitful in a consummate manner, to the extent that his bed, progeny, was perfect. So that's the second ascent that he achieved in Haran. He was able to marry, not 1, but 2 or 4, and have many, many children, the concubines, the 2 concubines. So he had 4 wives, and he was able to create a family. He didn't do it in Beersheba. He did it in Haran, in the worst place of the universe. That's where he's blessed with being fruitful and multiply.
The concubines were also daughters of Laban.
Therefore,
They were all sisters. All 4 were sisters.
no, so
But how did Rivka? How did the 2 ones become whatever? Right, and the other concubines also been on the same level. And yet
so
they're
how can you give them as maidservants? Why are they Zilpah and Bilhah are maidservants?
I don't know.
So here is the answer. Laban had 1 wife, and that wife gave birth to Rachel and Leah. Did you know they were twins? Anybody knew that they were twins?
No.
They were twins. Leah was first. They sent messengers between Rivka and her brother Laban that she had twins, Yaakov and Esau, and Laban had twins, Leah and Rachel. So they figured, let's marry them to each other. And that's why Leah's eyes were soft, because she cried that she's marrying Esau. By the way, when Leah was put into his room at night by the wedding, how come he didn't figure out it's not
a coat.
she got the coat? But
money.
even with the coat, it doesn't matter. In the morning, he turned to her and says, "You're a liar. Why didn't you tell me the whole night that I'm sleeping with you, not with your sister?" She says, "I'm talking about lying. You are the mother of all liars. You cheated your father for the blessings." He says to her, "I wasn't a cheater. I am the firstborn, because I bought my first right, my birthright, right? So now I'm a firstborn." She says to him, "If it's so, then legitimately I should be married to you, because the deal was the older to the oldest and the younger to the younger. Now that you bought the first birth, now I'm deserved to be your wife." And that's how he accepted. He realized that the soup that he cooked, he was fed.
Back to Harry's question.
Now, there is other details here that are very fascinating. I don't want, because we're starting the Rebbe stuff.
I'm just curious about the question about.
So I'm starting to explain.
How the concubines.
I'm going to explain. So Laban had one wife, married, with ketubah, with financial obligation. That's a wife. Then he married, so he had 2 children. Then he had another wife. Not a wife, a concubine. A concubine is someone he's not committed to be married to. They're just going to get together at night. That's called a concubine. No chuppah v'kiddushim, but they are for each other and nobody else. Some people, some women, I knew in Los Angeles, a Wells Fargo bank manager who would rather be a concubine for an Israeli that was quite successful, had a wife with 3 children. The wife didn't mind. And he had the other girl as a concubine. She was Israeli too. She was very successful. She didn't want children, and she wanted to have one man. She didn't care not to be married. She had her own home. They would get together on weekends or sometimes. Everybody was happy.
What's the address again, Rabbi?
Phone numbers, Rabbi? I got a lot of miles to fly. Harry, I'll take you too.
Okay, can we continue? I'm so
I'll
sorry.
get to this point.
I'm sorry.
I have a point I want to make. When you're done.
So the concubine of Laban gave him another twins, Zilpah and Bilhah. Bilhah and Zilpah. Bilhah was the younger, I believe Zilpah was the older. And they, therefore, because they're the daughters of a concubines, they are not treated as daughters, but they are treated as maidservants. And they are half-sisters to Rachel and Leah, because they had one father, Laban. They didn't have the same mother. When he married off Leah, he would give her a maidservant, one girl to assist. And he gave her the younger from the 2 sisters. He gave her Zilpah to deceive Yaakov that the younger girl is getting married. You understand that, right? Now, does it answer? Does it?
I didn't know this.
I have
Thank
one
you.
comment. Laban, for all his bad things, was the grandfather of 13 Jewish kids.
No question.
Right? He came. So if you really look at Laban was also the ancestor to the 12 tribes.
He's our grandfather. What's the
Yeah,
question?
I mean, it's just, so here it is. We got a good
All
guy.
you missing the JLI? Did you come to not JLI? The Tanya. When did we talk about that? The oral tradition. Last week,
Yeah, comes from, yes.
I spoke about.
Yes, it comes from.
Yitzchak lav Esav, why kitzayit befiv? Because there's a game. You remember I spoke about it. Kitzayit befiv is Torah shebal peh. The oral tradition is given to us by Esau's children. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, Onkelos, Ovadia Ger, Shmaya Naftalion, all these are the one who gave it to us.
I understand.
So, yes.
He gets credit.
I get that, but I'm just saying.
Were you at JLI yesterday?
Yeah.
Judaism is not a race. It's not a blood.
I didn't say.
It's not. So therefore, Laban is one of the, I think I shared in the Tanya class that the father of Abraham and Abraham's father was the worst kind of person. I don't want to go to details about the way, how he acted and what kind of a person he was. He was the very defiled human being, yet Abraham came out of him.
Well, what's interesting is Laban he's mentioned in the Haggadah. Moshe is not mentioned in the Haggadah.
Right.
I think it's interesting that Laban is mentioned in the Haggadah.
So what's the reason?
I don't know if he's somewhere.
Because Moshe wrote the Haggadah for his children. They're the only one who did not witness the miracles. And he had a mitzvah, Vayeitzei lebincha, teach your son. Everybody else didn't need Haggadah. They just reminded their children what they went through. Moshe's children grew up in Midian. So he's the first one, according to tradition, he's the one who wrote the Haggadah. Therefore, he didn't write about himself. Let's continue.
Pure gems.
So the Rebbe says that there are 3 types of ascent that happened to Yaakov. Number 1, the fact that he didn't change despite what is going around him makes him on a much higher rung. Number 2, he got married and built a house in Haran, which put them on a whole different pedestal as not just a holy man who is multiplying, being fruitful. See, they use the terminology of Hasidut. through his labor with Laban's sheep over the course of 20 years, he refined and elevated the sparks of holiness that were invested in Laban's sheep. This service generated a spiritual echo, alleviating Yaakov to greater height, to the extent that the man became prodigiously successful. What the Rabbi is saying is, when he was there, utilizing physical objects, materialistic goods to the service of God, what do? Is you take those sparks, this is Hasidic terminology, you take those sparks that creates the objects, and you make them holy, and you elevate them. When I eat on Shabbat good food, and I serve God with that food, I take the sparks, there are sparks. We're not going to talk about those sparks, spiritual sparks that are embedded in those goods, and I make them holy. Yaakov with the sheep, there is a whole talk about the sheep. You find that Yaakov was a shepherd. All the fathers were shepherds. Sheep is a very, very holy object among the forefathers. So what he did was acquiring wealth and amassing and living in the earth, being a shepherd, literally a shepherd. What he does is he is enabled to take those sparks and elevate them. Those sparks are very far from holiness. Therefore, they cannot be found in the Holy Land. He can only find them in Haran. That's why he had to go there to find and catch those sparks and bring them back to God. The actions of our patriarchs are a sign for the descendants. As such, Yaakov's departure from Be'er Sheva and journey to Haran are reflected in the divine service of every person. As Chaim explains, this journey alludes to the descent of the soul to this material plane, as well as the descent of the Jews into exile. Chaim says that the story of Yaakov going to Haran and enslavement by Laban and being cheated, and despite all that becoming very wealthy, is actually a DNA, a fingerprint of what happens to the Jewish people as a whole, and in addition to the soul, a soul of a Jew coming down from above. They're coming to Haran, the worst place. They're going to be dealt a lot of cheating, a lot of lying. Yet, if they steadfast in service of God, they'll be able to be very wealthy and very successful, multiply and fruitful. So everything we read about Yaakov is not a story of our forefather. It's the story of my and you story, each one of our soul coming down to the universe. These two are descents for the sake of ascents and contain parallels to the three aspects of the ascent experienced by Yaakov. Says Rabbi, every human being, the soul came down from above. It came down for a purpose, actually three purposes, just Yaakov.
When it says come down from Hashem, come down from Hashem, you came from above?
The neshama, yeah, yes. Coming from the Holy Land to the worst place. The body contains a Laban, a cheater, a liar. However, to get married, you need to get to that person. He's the father of the bride. And he's the one that you have to live with for 22 years. And yet, the outcome would be ascent in three ways. One is just like Yaakov became like a Baal Teshuvah, that just being challenged and stay connected to God is a greater achievement than living in his father. Same as the neshama, connecting to God in this universe where it's very challenging. That brings out the best of the neshama. The second one we talked about is to be multiply and fruitful, to have a family. We can gather more sparks and connect them to God. And the third one, those fallen sparks, literally fallen sparks, are only in this universe. They fell into this universe, not in spiritual worlds. And the neshama came here to be enslaved, to be cheated, to be lied to not allow you to sleep at night. But that's how you gather the sparks. The Rabbi is going to go on to the answering the question that we started. It's a very long one. I still don't have the solution how to make it in 45 minutes, but I believe so. We'll stop right here. I don't know what's the.
Let's wait for the next session.
The Rabbi is going to talk about the comparison between the soul and Jacob. And before the neshama goes down to the universe, she makes a vow. And God is also feeds the neshama with all its need. Anybody who study Tanya, by the beginning that they make him take an oath, the neshama, be righteous and don't be wicked. And even the whole world tells you you're wicked, consider yourself, that you're righteous, consider yourself wicked. Anybody who's been to Tanya. So it says the Rabbi, before you ascend to Haran, this is on the way, he's still in the Holy Land. God will feed the neshama with the vow also feeding with the power or the energy to overcome all the challenges. On the other hand, God promises that he will be with us and protect us for no matter where we go and where we find ourselves, as long as we keep our part. And that's why there are two parts. There is one part, one aspect of God will be my Lord, and I need you, God, to do this and that for me. On the other hand, I need to do also, I need to bring a sacrifice, I need to give tithes. There are requirements on both ends to make it happen. I believe this is part of the Rabbi's explanation.
Sure. Talk about the wives. We ever learned anything about where the wives